Andy Dalton, the Red Rifle, sticking it to Marvin Lewis, his old coach, who's now with the Raiders on the sidelines there. Andy Dalton, 319 yards, not one, not two, but three. Touchdowns, no interceptions, surgically, methodically, tearing apart the silver and black defense. Holy Max Crosby, Batman, what happened? 36-22 the final, and all the chatter about the Raiders' defense and how good they were supposed to be. Well, they haven't played well to start the year. There's no other way to say it. It's not a good defensive team right now, as Andy Dalton completed 70% of his passes. As almost always, the better story is in the losing locker room, and that is where Antonioperce, the head coach of the Raiders, he said, you know what? I'm not going to be Mr. Nice Guy and just say it wasn't our day. I'm not going to get up there and spew a bunch of cliches. No. Antonioperce did not bite his tongue. He called out his players after the Raiders were emasculated. We have the audio tape. Let's go to the audio tape.
The team just didn't seem to show up tonight.
No, they didn't. I think as the game went on, I don't think it was a team. I think there was definitely some individuals that made business decisions, and we'll make business decisions going forward as well.
Oh, your face! Oh, your face! Business decisions! Now, he didn't name players here. But again, that's the money quote. So let us discuss. Here's the question for the esteemed panel. What did Antonioperce mean when he was calling out Raider players for making business decisions? Those are his words, not mine, during the Panthers' loss. So I've got Uncle, British Game Show, and Beast. And we will combine all of these things together, and we will provide you a late-night, early-morning infomercial is what we're going to do. I remember reading a book about infomercials, and they said that a lot of them on the TV there, they just put people that look like they're doctors but aren't actually doctors. But if you put somebody on TV that has like a doctor's coat, people think they're doctors, and they never really check. All right, so anyway, to kick off here, got sidetracked. So Antonioperce, our Raiders head coach. Everyone loves him. He's got the whole Compton backstory, right? Grew up a Raider fan. But this was a bad day at the office, a terrible day at the office. And it goes without saying, to lose to the most embarrassing franchise in football, the Carolina Panthers, in your home opener and get blown out. Now, Antonioperce did not name individual players. Therefore, we have the editorial freedom, because he chose not to name individual players, he just said the group, that we can then name those players. And after a minutes-long MALLER investigation, as we activated the MIB, MALLER Investigative Bureau, and we started snooping around. I understand it goes against football decorum. You can't name individual players. But we are allowed to speculate because he didn't name those players. The smart money says, after looking over the situation, this is all about Uncle. Not crying Uncle, like Uncle Fester from the Addams family, right? Davante Adams. It's got to be Davante Adams, right? It has to be Davante Adams. It's got to be. Now, I don't know for sure. I'm just speculating. Isn't that a logical place to start, Davante Adams? He got the big money contract. A lot of those guys in the Raiders don't have the big money contract. I think it's Davante Adams, that he was calling him out indirectly. And Davante is the headliner. He's the wide receiver there. He had just 4 catches, 9 targets. He caught less than 50% of his targets for a very pedestrian 40 yards on 9 targets. And that is a pathetic business decision, if that was his decision to not show up there. And he had really bad body language. Didn't get talked about as much because the story in Dallas with CeeDee Lamb was worse. But the trade deadline is not until early November. Would the Raiders decide, hey, if this guy's going to not show up and make a business decision, we are going to make a business decision, right? I mean, that's the question, right? Are we going to make a business decision and trade him to the Jets or wherever? So, pretty crazy. All right, now, page 2 here. Following up, now we talked about this on Benny versus the Penny last week. And we were talking about Bryce Young came up a little bit in the conversation. And Bryce Young getting benched for Andy Dalton. And then Andy Dalton goes out and torches the Raiders. How is Bryce Young looking today after Andy Dalton goes out and has the top day or one of the top days of the young NFL season. So Dalton, he made that owner, David Tepper. Everyone's ripping David Tepper, right? Oh, he's an idiot. He's the village idiot. But he made David Tepper and Coach Dave Canales look like great fortune tellers, right? And I watched some of these pregame shows on television on Sunday, and they were ripping him. Like the media elites were tearing apart. The big talking heads were ripping David Tepper all the way. I saw Jimmy Johnson on Fox. I saw Nick Saban on ESPN over the weekend taking shots at David Tepper. But Bryce Young can't play, right? And so it's like that British game show, you are the weakest link, goodbye, right? The Raiders did not play well, right? They didn't play well. However, if Bryce had played, the Raiders would have won that game. He's that bad. I talked about this last week in a previous episode of the show. I fell down a rabbit hole on the YouTube, and they were breaking down Bryce Young and his throws. And there were people open, and he either wasn't seeing them or he was checking down. The funniest was the last game that Bryce Young played against the Chargers, where he would just go to the check down as his number one option. Now, I never played in the NFL, but even I know that's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. So he was the weakest link, and all these people defending him and blaming the ownership. I get that David Tepper's, he's got issues. I get that, right? But that does not mean that the decision to bench Bryce Young is not the correct decision. If they could go out there with Andy Dalton in year 14 and slice up the Raiders the way they did, come on. Same, I'm told, terrible offensive line, poor playmakers, incompetent coaching staff, and Andy Dalton is the antithesis of Bryce Young. Showing that the benching was warranted and deserved. It was deserved. And these quarterback apologists, it drives me insane. I mean, it's stop. All right, now the last thing here. How about the play of Caleb Williams? Now, you say he had big stats and he played well. Caleb Williams being roasted, even though he had over 300 yards passing and a couple of touchdowns, is that deserved? And you can't see me, but I'm nodding my head. Yes, it is deserved because that is the nature of the beast. He was the number one overall pick. And outside of some viral video clips on TikTok, he has been terrible. Absolute weak sauce. And here's the other thing, and this always drives me nuts, right? The people that don't watch the games and just look at the box score and say, I mean, you probably weren't watching this game unless you're a degenerate gambler and you're watching the game. And I was flipping around, and the numbers don't look that bad, right? Caleb Williams had 363 yards and 2 touchdowns. Spoiler alert, misleading. It is misleading. Here's why. He turned the ball over, Caleb Williams, not 1, not 2, but 3 times. And the yardage that he had was inflated because if you were watching the game in the first half, there was a Hail Mary that was caught but fell a yard short of the end zone. So it was just empty statistics. It didn't. The whole point of the play was to get a touchdown. They didn't get a touchdown. And you also had that second half when the Colts and late in the game were just kind of like playing a version of the prevent defense. And he got a bunch of yards in the fourth quarter. Kind of like Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott fattened up his stats. The game was over, and he fattened up his stats.